here at Wild Heart, we have a huge influence from the addiction recovery world, and I really like that. Predominantly, one of the parts of the cultures that we've picked up from the recovery world is what we would call the meeting after the meeting. And I love that we're so like Sangha strong here, that the refuge of community is something we hold very sacred here, the friendships. And if you don't feel that way right now, please stick around. I'm sure you'll make some lifelong friends here. I know I have. But like I said, the meeting after the meetings, where we start making friends and having discussions. It was a few weeks ago, we were having a little meeting after the meeting, and there was a request to talk about death contemplations, mindfulness of death, this practice of what we call Maraṇasati. Maraṇasati. So this word Maraṇasati, mindfulness of death, it's a compound word. 2 words. We have Mara and Sati. So Mara, a wonderful character in the Buddhist teachings. Mara is roughly the Buddhist equivalent to what Christians would call the devil, right? And so Mara is the representation of hindering thoughts, of hatred, of greed, of restlessness, of lethargy and doubt. Those things that kill our practice, kill our well-being, kill our meditations, our hopes and dreams. These are these thought processes that arise. And so what the Buddha did was say, I see you, Mara, right? And made peace with that killer in his mind. He didn't try to kill the killer. And so Mara literally means death. Some people call him the Lord of Death. Why? Because he'll kill your well-being, right? And so Maraṇasati starts with death, right? And then we have this word sati, S-A-T-I. And sati is translated as mindfulness, right? And while we have this word mindfulness that British scholars came up with to define this old Buddhist word sati, and it's a great word, if we look at the original meaning of sati, it means something more literal as to remember. So when you're lost in the stories, the judgments, the plans, the fantasies of the mind, you remember to come back to the breath. So Maraṇasati is to remember death. Isn't that awesome? And some of us more than others, or some are nodding, because I've gotten a great relief, really, a lot of peace when I remember death. And the cool thing about this death contemplation, it's featured in the core teachings on mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta. The Satipatthana Sutta are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And it's in the first foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of breath and body. And so this old school teaching on mindfulness is where a lot of the modern day secular mindfulness programs are based off of. If you take a mindfulness-based stress reduction class, I did it at Vanderbilt at the Osher Center, and I did that program, and I go, well, this is Satipatthana. It's because John Kabat-Zinn, who came up with mindfulness-based stress reduction, it was his mission to take the old school teachings and meet them in a modern approach. And he very much was influenced by this Satipatthana Sutta. And so now you get all the apps and all the magazines and all of these things that are really based off of this old teaching. But they seem to leave a few things out, like mindfulness of death. And so while we can have the old school richness of all the mindfulness of breath and body and feelings and mind, let's go for the whole thing. And let's include what we may have left out in our modern culture, Maraṇasati, mindfulness of death. Because, it happens ever so often. I love talking about this, that mindfulness is often sold as this relaxation technique. That you go to the grocery store and you see the mindful magazines, and you see blemish-free models floating on fluffy white clouds without a care in the world, and it's Mindful magazine. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll give it a shot because that hot model on that magazine seems to have something going on. And then you go to a meditation center, and then you sit in meditation, and you're like, oh, my neck hurts. Ugh, my mind is bugging out. Ugh, I forgot I need to do this thing. Ugh, there was an old scary memory that arose. Because mindfulness is a way we make peace with the painful experiences, not as a way to bypass it and relax it and get 20 minutes relaxation and then come back and then we're presented with all of the scary, painful, and disturbing things. No, this is a way to make peace with the painful, scary, and disturbing things, because it's inevitable in life we will all be faced with these things. And so a quite courageous act is to step into the practice of mindfulness of death, probably the scariest thing I could ever think of. And so it's like almost this backwards thing that we do when we embrace death fully, we actually start living life fully. As we resist death, I don't know if we're living life fully. And so I appreciate it that this is something the Buddha held quite sacred, quite important in our practice. And there's an old story in the suttas about a group of monks who are practicing. And he goes up to these monks, the Buddha goes up to these monks and says, okay, well, when you're practicing, are you doing death contemplation? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, well, tell me, how you doing it? And we reflect on someday we will die, and that motivates us to practice. And he's like, someday you're going to die? He's like, nah, let me help you out here. He says, in every moment, reflect on this moment you may die. Make it a mindfulness of breathing practice. And know each breath may be your last. As you breathe in, feel that life coming in. And as you breathe out, feel that life leaving. And know that exhalation may be your last breath. You may not have another breath that comes in. So be mindful that this very breath may be your last breath, can be your last breath, someday will be your last breath. Actually, let's just focus on this right now, that this breath is here, right? And he's not doing this in a way to be morbid, because he continues on this teachings as we exhale with the reality that we may not breathe in again, wishing ourselves health and gratitude as the next breath comes in. And so having this heart of gratitude that comes with being so upfront about mindfulness of death. And so I say it so often here that these bodies are set up for survival, not happiness. And it's quite natural to fear death. Why? Because we're beings trying to stay alive, right? And it makes sense, yeah. We're afraid of death. We cling to life. But this dilemma that we find ourselves in may be a hindering quality to our own genuine happiness. And so let's be aware that it is natural for us to cling to life and resist death. And when we bring that awareness to the forefront, we don't end up being reactive in the ways that we take life for granted, or reactive in the ways that we are like, oh, I don't want to see death, or I don't want to talk about the harmful things or the painful things around death. And it's been extremely helpful in my own life that I now I'm talking about it, but I do want to step into it, that this topic came up in the meeting after the meeting, and it's also in my heart right now. That my aunt, she was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, and she recently, about a few weeks ago, was told to seek afterlife care, or go hospice. Yeah, seek hospice, because the treatments aren't working, the chemo's not working. And so, end of life care, excuse me. And so, the way she approached this end of life care, she didn't reach out to hospice. She's a devout Catholic, and so she decided to go to this, it's like kind of almost retreat space for Catholics. It's a monastery. You know, I'm used to Buddhist monasteries, but it's a monastery for Catholic monks and nuns. And she was going there, and it was in Huntsville. So I was like, oh, I have the day off, and I drove last Friday to go meet with her. And when I saw her, it was just like she lost weight, and she wasn't looking that great, but her heart was just so open. And like we saw each other, and she just held my hands, and she says, you know, I'm so grateful for the work you do with people. You help people out so much. Thank you for doing this work. And she looked into my eyes, and she said, there's love in your eyes. I was like, whoa. And, you know, she is a loving person, but this was on 10. There was something in her that had a loving presence when she's just so aware that she is at the ending portion of her life, right? And so this is what she was doing. She was being devoted. And I remember, like, we were all sitting there, and in this place they have Mass, like Catholic Church, Mass 3 times a day. And we were sitting there, and we were trying to figure out where to go. And she told us, oh, I want to take communion again after lunch. And made it, like so devoted to her spiritual faith. And it was, like, heartwarming, right? And so I think that warm heart comes from the acknowledgement that she's going, and we don't have to wait until it's hospice time. We can have our hearts warm up by fully knowing the inevitability of our own deaths, because it hasn't always been warm for me. And like, I remember, so I drove to this Catholic space. It was kind of awkward. Yeah, I'm, you know, Italian-American, cultural Catholic, but it's been a while, you know. And so I go to this Catholic space, and I don't know where to go. So I go to the gift shop. And so I go through the gift shop, and it's like really awesome. I'm loving it there. But they had like these coins where they had different patron saints on them. And I got one coin. I think I have it with me. I've been keeping it in my pocket. And it's a coin of Saint Maximilian Kolbe. And I have an affinity for Maximilian Kolbe, if any of you know who he is. That I was baptized in the Catholic Church the day that Maximilian Kolbe became a saint. And Maximilian, he was a martyr in a concentration camp during World War II, that he sacrificed his life to save somebody else. And so he's known in this way of connecting with the World War II concentration camps. He's from Poland, right? And so I picked up this coin because I felt that affinity, that, you know, I was baptized when he became a saint, and he's always kind of been somebody I looked up to. And then I looked at it, and then he's the patron saint of addiction recovery. I wasn't aware of that. And so while I'm here, like, acknowledging my aunt's passing and her health falling and her warm heart, that, you know, addiction recovery has been a big part of my life, and especially around death, that I've had many friends and many families. And actually, like, what has brought me onto this path has been a lot of death. And, you know, so my memory went back to a time period that I was not doing okay. And then, you know, there was a time, like, in my family, we're an alcoholic family. My father was an alcoholic, my mom codependent to a certain degree. And we didn't talk about addiction recovery. Like, I didn't know Maximilian was a patron saint of addiction recovery because I didn't know what it was, right? And so it was like a lot of stigma around that stuff. And like, I've always felt like I was kind of weird, right? Like, there was always something about me that I can't fully welcome in, right? And my dad was like, a weirdo. He worked in the music industry, he partied, this and that, And, one day, my mom called me, and, my parents were divorced, but my mom would check on my father. My mom called me and said, I can't get a hold of your father. I'm worried. My mom worries. And I go to my dad's house, and I knock on the door, and he doesn't answer. I yelled, hey, Dad, let me in. He doesn't answer. I ring the doorbell, no answer. Now I'm worried, and had a key. So I unlocked the door, and I opened the door and found my dad dead on his living room floor. His kidneys gave out from his drinking. And at that point, I did not know how to hold that. So I went to the very thing that I knew could make me feel okay, and that was drinking. And in this life of masking that grief, masking that reality of death, I was just living out a lot of hurt. And in my life, I had friends that were next to me one day, gone the next. A friend next to me, gone the next. And it was like, well, when's my turn, right? And so it was like this passive suicide that I was living. And it was until I found this Dharma. No shit, that this Dharma found me, really. And that's a whole nother story to tell, that this Dharma found me, and the first lesson I saw was dukkha. Birth, aging, sickness, death. And it was so heartwarming to know that there was a spiritual practice out there that wasn't creating stigmas around death, wasn't creating a mask around death. And this Dharma saved my life because it said, hey, let's talk about death. And I needed to talk about death. I needed to feel death. I needed to feel all of its expressions. So what happened? I got angry. Oh, there's anger in here, right? I got confused, right? You know that confusion that comes with death, that they're there and then they're gone? It's like they're gone. Where did they go, right? It's confusing. Blaming. I was blaming myself. I was blaming alcohol, blaming the world, until I felt grief. And grief is such a confusing emotion, isn't it? It's like love, and it's loss, and it's like sad, and it's if I didn't love, there wouldn't be grief. And so, yeah, it took some time, but first things first, I had to admit that death is inevitable in life. And so when I talk about death as inevitable in life, sometimes it comes off, we get confused on Buddhism that it's a cold practice, that it's all about non-attachment, right? And I do believe Buddhism is about non-attachment, but it doesn't mean non-bonding. That we take refuge in community, in sangha, in people, right, in one another, because we're intended to bond with one another, right? The image of the Buddhist monk in a carved-out cave somewhere is not my experience. My experience in Dharma, especially with monastics, they're around people all the time, right? They're connecting with each other. They're arguing over lunch, right? They're people too. And we are people too. And I think it's amazing that we understand bonding as a part of this, but also bonding goes away, and grief is a part of this as well. And so when we harden and say, oh, non-attachment as a way to avoid our emotions, that's not what this is about. It's like, let's have the full experience. Let's bond, let's love, let's connect, and let's let that heart break. Because when the heart breaks, it can break open. And that's what I experienced with my aunt. Her heart was broken open, and it was just like she was being so intimate with her love. It was like she was not holding back and just connecting and holding my hand. And I was like, this is awesome, right? And so these are like two examples in my own life where I'm like, yeah, my father's death was just like a closed heart and just like masking these things. And then being around my aunt where it's like this open heart. And it's like, there are possibilities. And so what gives us the possibility, in my experience, is doing these practices. So I want to talk a little bit about practice and then step into a little bit of practice. And let's be gentle with this practice. Maraṇasati, or cemetery contemplation, or what we would sometimes call the charnel ground practice. And so, in this Satipatthana, like I said, this old teaching on mindfulness, we're instructed to go to what the Buddha called the charnel grounds. And the charnel grounds are a place where people leave dead bodies. And so especially people that didn't have money, they would just take the dead bodies and just leave them out, and they would just rot. And so, as practitioners, we're invited to go to these charnel grounds where these dead bodies are left out and watch them. And just watch them decay. Just as our object can be our breath, the object is a decaying body. And then you feel those feelings, right? I don't know if any of y'all seen dead bodies, but it feels a certain way, right? I remember as a kid, that feeling, like, I used to watch, like, Faces of Death. Y'all remember Faces of Death? Rotten.com, that was a certain time period. I remember Rotten.com, okay. It was yeah, thank you. A website where you can go look at dead bodies, right? And then it felt so rebellious. But now then I go to this wholesome Buddhist practice, they're like, nah, I look at the dead body and meditate on that and see if you can remain compassionate and grateful for your life as you do this. So, okay, we don't have charnel grounds here today. We don't have dead bodies lying around. We go to funerals and we dress up the bodies. So what do? Right? A few creative ways we can practice mindfulness of death. One way that I feel like I've talked about a few times here is look at roadkill. I go for morning walks, and last time I was talking about like a possum. I got 2 dead mice on my morning walk. And so at one point, the mice were, I'd take a walk every day. So every day I get to see the mice, decaying. And so I would see these mice, and it's, oh, this cute mouse. Oh, this cute dead mouse. Oh, and then I reflect, someday I will be like that mouse. This body, too, will have the same fate as this mouse. And then over time, it's like flat now, and it's starting to lose its hair. You can see the skeleton of the mouse. And right now, there's only one mouse left. Somebody must have run over the other mouse and drove over it probably somewhere else now. And that, for me, was a message of like, really, I saw meaning in that life keeps going. Life keeps going. Oh, okay, let's see that, okay. And so, as, we'll see where things go, but this mouse is flat and like has its little fingers or whatever, yeah. And it's reflecting on that this body too will be flattened and bones and all of that. And taking this into your practice, right? That like I said, I do this every day looking at roadkill, right? And then another way is we have the internet, but let's be mindful of what internet resources we use to practice this. Probably not rotten.com, because it was quite violent deaths that were intended to give a certain emotion. Doug's Dharma is a wonderful resource. Anybody watch Doug's Dharma on YouTube? Yeah. He has a talk on Maraṇasati, if you look it up. And in it, he has these really sweet links to vlogs of people living with cancer specifically, and it's them vlogging with a camera going through their experience of dying. And it's very heartwarming and sad, and you're going to cry if you watch it, right? So it's pretty intense. Somebody being honest about their process of dying, and in the video they're no longer there, right? And that we step into this practice, and that's an option as well. And then there's even body farms. I've never been to a body farm, but I have found videos online. Actually, in one program we've done here, we had a big screen, and we showed videos of the body farms where they take people's bodies and leave them out and let them go through their natural process of decaying, so people can witness that. But in a more traditional way, and what I'll guide you through, is to use our own imagination. So in the discourse, we're asked, and it goes through 9 specific scenarios, but I'll just guide you through probably about 3, of you're witnessing a body. And I'm going to ask you to bring to mind a dead body using your imagination. And you start with a body that is freshly dead. The body's still, it's bloated, it's blue, it's not moving, the body can't breathe, right? And so as you witness this, you feel what that feels like to imagine a dead body. And then you reflect on this body too is of the same nature, and feeling what it's like in your own body to know someday it will be like that. And then we'll move forward, and in this discourse we're asked to bring to mind a body that's even further dead, right? That you can see the bones now, and there's sinews, and there's a little bit of blood and like that, but you're starting to see the body decompose. And as you notice this body decomposing, and you could see the bones, reflect, pause, this body too, with love in your heart, reflect on this body too is of that same nature. And you can actually feel your own bones inside of you, and knowing that these bones will be scattered like that someday. And speaking of, we go even further, right? We come across a body that hardly looks like a body anymore. It's just bones scattered in all directions. They're not even put together anymore. Just bodies out in the elements. And reflecting on this very body too will be like that. Will be scattered out in the elements. Be just bones. And then the last reflection is the bones. The bones decompose and become dust and fly away. And this body too will be subject to dust that just goes away. And so this is a practice, and we want to do this with compassion. While this is a mindfulness practice, I really think this is a compassion practice. Compassion's the way we develop a loving presence with pain. And so we can find the sacredness, the beauty in the compassion as we just sit and reflecting on dead bodies in our own imagination, right? All right. So we'll do maybe about a 10-minute meditation on this. Sound all right? Okay. Yeah, so finding a supportive posture, that this is a mindfulness of body practice, so finding a way to sit that supports mindfulness of the body, opens up the lines of communications with this body. And if it feels right for you, allowing the eyes to close. And if at any point in this meditation it becomes challenging and difficult, and you feel overwhelmed, feel free to just open up your eyes and look through the space we're in and come back to the space. But for now, just guiding the awareness inward towards the body and the breath, softening any points of tension held in this body. Maybe just giving yourself a few refreshing, deep in and out breaths. With these deep in and out breaths, I invite you to guide the awareness further inward towards your own heart. And just breathing in and out from your heart space. And it may feel right to put your hands on your heart, to hold your own heart, to caress your heart, allowing your heart to be held. As you reflect on your intentions to have compassion for grief and have gratitude for life, this brief and fragile existence we find ourselves in. And so within this mind, Just imagining that you're out in the elements, maybe going for a hike in a secluded area. And as you're in this secluded area, you find a recently deceased body just out in the elements. And this body is still, no breath, no life in this body. That the body is beginning to become blue, that the body is bloated. And just meditating on the image of this fairly recently deceased body. What does this body look like? And what does it feel like to witness this body? And lovingly remember that this body too is subject to this fate. Just breathing into your own body, feeling into your own body. And it's subject to this death as well. It's subject to no longer breathe. It's subject to turn blue and bloated. This body too. And breathing in and out, softening the body, softening the heart as we come back to another image out in the elements. And this time you discover a dead body that has been there a while, beginning to decompose. That this body still has some skin, some sinews, some blood, but you can see the skeleton of the body. And just meditating on the mental image of this decomposing body. And coming back to your own body, feeling your bones, your skin, as you lovingly confront that your body too is of the same nature, to decompose. Back to the body, back to the heart, back to the breath. And as we move forward in this exercise, within our own imagination, out in the elements, walking around, and we encounter some human bones scattered all over the place. They're not even connected. I'm just meditating on the image of these scattered bones. And this body too, your body as well, is of this nature, to be scattered bones. Lovingly embrace this truth. Breathing in and out, reflecting how these bones eventually turn into dust. And as the dust blows away in the wind, this body too, your body as well, will decompose into dust. So with each in and out breath, reflecting on this truth that your body will be dust. And as we fully embrace death, it opens us up to fully embrace life. So feeling this life force, the breath, feeling the heart beating, and just fully embracing what it feels like to be alive right now. That in this very moment we can live with both truths, life and death. And so with a few deep in and out breaths, adjusting your body, making any movements that feel right, as you allow the eyes to open, and coming back to the room, scanning throughout the room, looking around, and coming back to life, living. Right, thank you for your practice.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noechel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.